A brand new Netflix documentary miniseries, Churchill at War, explores the monumental life and legacy of former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom Winston Churchill, primarily focusing on his role before, during, and just after World War II. There have been many versions of Winston Churchill in movies and TV shows, perhaps the most well-known at present being John Lithgow's portrayal in Netflix's The Crown. However, The Crown's representation of Churchill, like many others, was at least partially fictionalized. Churchill at War is a much graver representation of Churchill's history, particularly pertaining to his efforts during World War II. Churchill became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom on May 10, 1940, less than a year after World War II had begun and the very same day Germany invaded France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Over the next 5 years, Churchill served in this role, rallying people to join in the fight to stop Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany largely with the power of speech, both within the United Kingdom and beyond it. These efforts are the main focus of Churchill at War, but what came after World War II for Winston Churchill? Winston Churchill became the leader of the opposition in 1945. Churchill's first term as Prime Minister came to an end with Clement Attlee's victory. Winston Churchill giving a speech in Churchill at War. World War II ended on September 2, 1945, just a few months after Clement Attlee defeated Churchill in the election and became the new Prime Minister, although, notably, Germany's surrender had come in May of that year. After this election loss, Churchill became the leader of the opposition, still leading the Conservative Party. While his governmental role may have shifted, though, Churchill remained prominent, especially as an orator. During this era, Churchill was particularly vocal about his growing concerns regarding the Soviet Union and communism. In fact, less than a year after the war had ended, Winston Churchill gave his now famous Iron Curtain speech in the United States, in March of 1946. Perhaps because of his continued efforts to maintain peace and remind the world of all that had been overcome following the conclusion of World War II, it wasn't long before Churchill was re-elected as Prime Minister. However, Churchill at War also highlights that this wasn't an entirely popular stance for Churchill to take. Rather, the documentary addresses how these comments led to Churchill being called a warmonger, something he had already been accused of throughout World War II as well. Former United States President George W. Bush also has an appearance at this point in Churchill at War, vocalizing that Churchill's good versus evil view on the Soviet Union is the type of stance that upsets people. Churchill was elected as the Prime Minister in 1951. Winston Churchill became Prime Minister for a second time. In 1951, Winston Churchill became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom for a second and final time after the Labour Party, still led by Clement Attlee, lost. This term ran from 1951 until 1955, when Churchill ultimately resigned, and it is generally believed that this term was impacted by Churchill's age and health concerns. Nevertheless, Churchill continued to have a major impact on the United Kingdom and beyond during those 4 years. From 1951 to 1955, Churchill continued his attempts to ease the mounting tensions of the Cold War and further the relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. He was also navigating major changes globally at this point in history, as more and more countries fought for their independence. Churchill at War doesn't shy away from pointing out that Churchill's responses to these efforts were complex, controversial, and at times contradictory, with some in the documentary pointing to Churchill's stance on German invasion conflicting with his dedication to the British Empire. Churchill's 1955 resignation explained. This difficult decision came down to age and health. Winston Churchill in Churchill at War sitting at a desk. As mentioned, there were increasing concerns about Churchill's age and his health throughout his second term as Prime Minister. Churchill was approximately 77 years old when he became Prime Minister for the second time, which many feared would impact his ability to serve in this role. These worries only grew when Churchill suffered a stroke in 1953, which came on the heels of other health scares in recent years. While that stroke did not immediately require Churchill to step down, it signaled what was to come. Ultimately, Churchill's health concerns meant that he had to resign, and he finally did so on April 5, 1955. Unsurprisingly, given how committed to the United Kingdom he had proven to be throughout his life, Churchill's resignation as Prime Minister did not mean that he was walking away from politics, far from it. How Churchill remained involved in politics and foreign affairs after his resignation. Winston Churchill remained a Member of Parliament. Winston Churchill in Churchill at War with a cigar in his mouth. Despite his age and health, after stepping down as Prime Minister, Winston Churchill remained a Member of Parliament. In fact, Churchill stayed in this role until 1964, just a year before his death. Understandably, though, his role was quite diminished, particularly in the final years of his life. Although he still played a part in government, he was seen, and heard from, much less frequently during those years.